Hello, I'm Leslie Leyton. Welcome to Local Edition. Take a new media, instant tweets, a 24-hour news cycle, and a new president that has a lot to say and is moving quick in his first couple weeks of presidency. And there's a lot to say, a lot to talk about, especially if you are a political science professor. With us now, political science professor from Cal State Fullerton, Matthew Jarvis. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you here. One of the most recent things, the Supreme Court nomination, a very big deal, can change the future of so many decisions in our country. What do you make of what is happening in regards to that?
Well, it's very, very interesting because this is a seat that's been open on the Supreme Court for not quite a year yet, but well into a large chunk of Obama's presidency. And of course, he had a nominee in Merrick Garland, which the Republicans refused to hold hearings on, arguing that it was too close to the upcoming election, and that the people needed to have a say. I missed that part in the Constitution where it said presidents don't get to appoint anybody in the last 10 months of their presidency, but apparently it's there. And so they are now going to proceed forward holding this. So a number of folks on the left have sort of two objections. They would, of course, object to the nominee based on his ideology alone. But they're also objecting to the process. In the end, though, they don't have a lot of tools at their disposal. Since the Democrats under Obama had loosened the restrictions on when you can have filibusters, they kept it for the Supreme Court, but they loosened it for other nominees. The Republicans might not seem inclined to keep it around if the Democrats try to filibuster this nominee.
President Trump has said that he might take the approach of going nuclear on this. Explain to people what going nuclear means and what kind of tool that is that Republicans might have in having the heavier hand over Democrats in this nomination.
Well, so going nuclear refers to getting rid of the filibuster. So the filibuster still exists in the chamber for legislation and for Supreme Court nominations. But for other nominations, the Democrats got rid of that during the Obama administration. The nuclear option has been tossed about as this, we're going to end comedy, and we have a majority, we are going to use it, tool. Democrats and Republicans have both threatened to go nuclear at various points over the last 2 decades. But now, as the parties become increasingly polarized, as the Democrats and Republicans in the Senate have less and less that they might ever agree on, they see potential to just wanting to run the chamber by majority rule. On the other hand, a lot of them can remember the last time they were in the minority and how that wasn't particularly a lot of fun. And so some of them like to keep it around in case their party ends up on the losing side of the next election.
All right. Well, switching gears a little bit here. At no time in our history have we had the technology we have now, the tweets, the 24-hour news cycle, and all of this instant information that is not necessarily always vetted and coming from absolutely everywhere. How does that change the public psyche toward new developments in politics and the way that a president might govern?
Well, I like to approach it actually from the perspective of what it does for a politician. So for the average consumer, the fact that we're seeing something online or in a tweet isn't at its root all that different from having seen it in a slower medium of newspapers, which were daily or weekly newspapers, or it really isn't that different. You sort of learn the information, you can still react to it. The difference is the volume that the internet brings. So you don't just have to look at one source of information, your local newspaper, your local TV station. You're now able to pick and choose sources.
But how about the part of trying to figure out what it all means? Just because something has a lot of quantity or because it's very loud doesn't mean it's more correct than a softer spoken message.
Well, and I think that's where the reaction of politicians and what you might call the elite information providers comes in. And so with this torrent of information, a person's going to have to pick and choose, filter amongst it. And people naturally are going to often pick the source that agrees with them. It says something, I think they're coming from the right perspective there, and then you follow them for more news. The problem is if we're all getting our news from one source and those sources are biased, that leads us to believe things that simply aren't true. I liken the example of the man who went into that pizza parlor in New York, not New York, in Washington with a gun, seeking to free the child sex slaves that he thought Clinton and her chief of staff had there. It was a rumor that got started on some right-wing websites, but it stayed there. And if you're only consuming that information, you never have a chance to go, wait a minute, that's just not true. It can happen on the left, it can happen on the right. But consuming all your information from a news source, particularly a news source that increasingly are biased one way or the other, can lead to things where we are actually having terms like alternative facts tossed out there because people have different things that they believe to be true. And it's hard to have a conversation if you and I can't agree on the meaning of common words.
Well, if we're overdosing on information all of the time, how do you begin to ferret through all of it? And is there really any solution? Who should be setting the agenda, the sober agenda that people with reason would tune into?
Wow, a sober agenda that people with reason would tune into. Who would set that? Historically, the gatekeepers would have been the media. But with distrust in the media at now sort of record highs, I don't know who that would be. You might sort of have pointed to a politician who might have been more moderate. We've kind of gotten rid of those. So if you're looking for what is neutral, what is true, it's hard to say. We're getting to the point where if you're getting your news from your friends, if you're getting your news from biased websites, you're at one point going to be unlikely to be able to tell what's real and what's not.
Okay, so what do you advise, and do you think there is any hope in the future to have sources where people can tune in with confidence to help understand what's really happening in the news of the day?
Well, if I put on my professor hat and I go in the Wayback Machine and say what I would have said a dozen years ago, it would have been check your sources, rely on the mainstream media, but check with multiple sources. And that would have been the advice I would have given a dozen years ago. Today, I'm not even sure it's that simple. How do you rely on the New York Times or Washington Post as a source if the Trump administration is freezing them out of the briefing room or not giving them any information? They may be attempting to be unbiased, but if they don't have actually information facts to report, at some point there's not much information there. And so reporters can engage in the old style of reporting, the pounding and getting the leaks and getting the background information. But it's going to require our media to adjust their tactics. It's going to require our viewers and readers to turn away from the salacious, the quick fix, the quick little endorphin fix you get when you see something that you like. And you're going to have to sit there and go, ask yourself, is it true? That's going to take a lot more work on the part of our citizenry.
Cal State University, Fullerton professor, thank you so much for being here. Matthew Jarvis, appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Glad you could be along too. I'm Leslie Leyton.